The snow had been falling for 3 days straight when the maintenance crew finally arrived at Pinecrest Lodge on the morning of December 17, 1991. The small rental cabin sat 15 miles outside of Ashford, Washington, tucked between towering Douglas firs that had stood for over 200 years. The trees created a natural barrier around the property, making it invisible from the main road, which was exactly what people came here for. Privacy, solitude, a chance to disappear from the world for a little while. But sometimes people disappeared for good. Randy Holcomb stepped out of his pickup truck, boots crunching against the fresh powder. He had been managing properties in this area for 12 years, and something about this particular morning felt wrong. The cabin door was wide open, swinging slightly in the wind. Snow had drifted inside, covering the hardwood floor in a thin white blanket. The rental car that should have been parked out front was gone, and there was an eerie stillness to the place. The kind that makes your skin prickle even when you cannot explain why. Randy called out, but his voice just echoed back through the empty trees. The couple who had rented the cabin were supposed to have checked out 2 days ago. Their names were Michael and Lauren Garrett, newlyweds from Portland, Oregon, married just 6 weeks earlier on November 2nd. Lauren was 24 years old, a kindergarten teacher with auburn hair and a smile that lit up every photograph. Michael was 27, a software engineer who had proposed to Lauren on a hiking trail overlooking the Columbia River Valley. They had chosen this remote cabin for a delayed honeymoon, wanting something quiet and romantic before the holidays consumed their families. They had paid in full, in advance, with a personal check. They had called the property office on December 13th to confirm their arrival. Everything had been perfectly normal, until they vanished. Randy stepped inside the cabin, his breath visible in the frigid air. The heat had been turned off, which was strange. Guests usually left it running until the last minute. The main room was tidy, almost too tidy, like someone had cleaned up in a hurry. 2 coffee mugs sat on the kitchen counter, rinsed but not put away. A paperback novel lay face down on the arm of the couch, its spine cracked open to page 73. The bed in the back room was made, the comforter pulled tight with military precision. But then Randy noticed the bathroom. The door was ajar, and when he pushed it open, his stomach dropped. Towels were piled on the floor, soaked through and stained with something dark. The bathroom sink was still wet, droplets clinging to the porcelain. And on the mirror, written in what looked like condensation or soap residue, were 2 words that had already started to fade. Randy backed out of the cabin, his heart hammering. He did not touch anything else. He walked straight to his truck and radioed the sheriff's department, his voice shaking as he reported what he had found. Within 90 minutes, 3 patrol cars and an investigator from the Lewis County Sheriff's Office were on site, yellow tape coordinating. The investigation began immediately, but it would take years before anyone truly understood how strange this case really was. Detective Frank Morelli was the lead investigator assigned to the Garrett disappearance. He was a 22-year veteran of the force, a man who had seen everything from domestic disputes to drug trafficking rings. But this case gnawed at him in a way few others had. The details did not add up, the timeline did not make sense, and the more he dug, the more questions emerged. The rental car, a beige Toyota Camry, was found on December 20th, 3 days after the cabin was discovered empty. It was parked at a rest stop along Highway 12, roughly 40 miles east of the cabin, halfway to Yakima. The keys were still in the ignition. The gas tank was full. There was no damage to the vehicle, no signs of a struggle. Inside the trunk, investigators found 2 suitcases, both packed with clothes. Lauren's purse was tucked beneath the passenger seat, her wallet still inside, containing her driver's license, 2 credit cards, and $43 in cash. Michael's wallet was gone. His jacket, however, was draped across the back seat, even though the temperatures that week had been below freezing. And then there was the Polaroid photograph. It was wedged into the sun visor on the driver's side, held in place by a rubber band. The photo showed Lauren and Michael standing in front of the cabin, smiling, arms wrapped around each other. The timestamp on the bottom right corner read, December 14th, 1991, the day after they had checked in. but someone had drawn a red X over Lauren's face. Morelli sent the photo to the lab for analysis, but the results were inconclusive. The ink was from a standard ballpoint pen, the kind you could buy at any drugstore. There were no fingerprints on the photo except for Michael's and Lauren's. No trace evidence that would point to a third party. The towels from the bathroom were tested as well. The dark stains were not blood, as investigators had initially suspected. They were soil, mixed with water and something organic that the lab could not fully identify. Moss, maybe, or decayed plant matter, the kind of thing you might track in from the woods. But why would someone need to wash mud off in the middle of December, when the ground was frozen solid under 2 feet of snow? Morelli interviewed everyone connected to the case. Lauren's family in Portland described her as cautious, responsible, someone who always checked in. She had called her mother on December 14th, the same day the photograph was taken, and had sounded perfectly fine. Happy, even. She had mentioned that the cabin was beautiful, that Michael had built a fire, that they were planning to hike the next morning if the snow let up. Michael's co-workers said he had been excited about the trip, that he had seemed relaxed and optimistic. There were no marital problems, no financial troubles, no reason for either of them to run away. Their bank accounts showed no unusual activity. Their credit cards had not been used since December 13th, when Michael had filled the gas tank in Ashford. Theories began to circulate almost immediately. Some believed the couple had gotten lost in the woods during a hike and succumbed to exposure. Search and rescue teams combed the area for weeks but found nothing. No tracks, no torn clothing, no signs of a campsite. Others speculated that they had been abducted by someone passing through the area, but there were no reports of suspicious vehicles, no witnesses, no ransom demand. And then there were the whispers about the cabin itself. Pinecrest Lodge had a history, though most people did not know it. The property had been built in 1962 by a man named Edwin Carver, a retired banker who wanted a quiet place to spend his final years. Edwin lived there alone for almost a decade, rarely venturing into town, rarely speaking to anyone. In 1971, he disappeared. His body was never found. The cabin sat empty for years until it was eventually sold and converted into a rental property. Some locals claimed the place was cursed. Others said Edwin had been involved in something dark, something that had drawn the wrong kind of attention. But no one could ever prove anything, and over time the stories faded into local folklore, until the Garretts vanished. By the spring of 1992, the case had gone cold. Morelli had exhausted every lead, interviewed every possible witness, followed every theory to its dead end. The FBI briefly got involved, suspecting potential foul play, but they too came up empty. Michael and Lauren Garrett had simply evaporated, leaving behind a cabin full of unanswered questions and a photograph with a red X over Lauren's face. Their families held a memorial service in June of that year, though there were no bodies to bury. Lauren's mother stood at the podium, clutching a framed photo of her daughter, and begged anyone with information to come forward. No one did. The story ran in newspapers across the Pacific Northwest, but within weeks it was buried beneath other headlines, other tragedies, other mysteries. Life moved on, as it always does, but the questions remained. 15 years passed. On January 8, 2006, a group of snowmobilers were riding through the backcountry near Mount Rainier, roughly 20 miles north of where the cabin stood. The winter had been brutal that year, with record snowfall blanketing the region. Drifts in some areas reached 12 feet high, swallowing entire sections of forest. One of the riders, a man named Troy Benson, veered off the main trail to take a shortcut through a narrow ravine. His sled hit something solid beneath the snow, sending him tumbling forward into a snowbank. When he stood up, swearing and brushing off the powder, he looked back to see what he had struck. It was a metal suitcase, partially buried, its corners poking through the ice. Troy called out to his friends, and together they dug it out. The suitcase was old, with rust eating away at the hinges, and a thick layer of frost coating the exterior. It had no luggage tag, no identifying marks. But it was heavy, far heavier than it should have been. They loaded it onto one of the sleds and brought it back to the ranger station at the base of the mountain. The ranger on duty, a woman named Kara Finch, took one look at it and felt a chill run down her spine. She had been working in these mountains for 8 years, and she had never seen anything like this. She called the Lewis County Sheriff's Office, and within hours, investigators were on their way. When they opened the suitcase, the air in the room seemed to freeze. Inside were clothes, neatly folded and frozen solid, a pair of men's hiking boots, a flannel shirt, a woman's scarf, navy blue with tiny white snowflakes, and beneath it all, wrapped in a plastic bag, was a driver's license. Lauren Garrett's driver's license. The case was reopened immediately. Detective Morelli, now nearing retirement, was brought back to lead the investigation once again. He stood in the evidence room, staring at the contents of the suitcase spread out on the table, and felt the weight of 15 years crash down on him. The clothes were tested for DNA, and the results confirmed what everyone already suspected. They belonged to Lauren and Michael. But there was something else, something far more disturbing. Mixed in with the fabric were traces of accelerant, the kind used to start fires, and on the inside lining of the suitcase, barely visible, were scorch marks. Someone had tried to burn the contents before sealing it shut. Morelli reviewed every detail of the original case, cross-referencing it with the new evidence. The suitcase had been found 20 miles from the cabin, in an area that would have required significant effort to reach, especially in the middle of winter. There were no trails nearby, no roads, no logical reason for anyone to be carrying a suitcase through that terrain, unless they were trying to hide something. The search resumed, this time focusing on the area where the suitcase had been found. Cadaver dogs were brought in, scanning the frozen ground for any trace of human remains. Helicopters flew grid patterns over the forest, using thermal imaging to detect anomalies beneath the snow. Divers checked the icy rivers and streams, searching for anything that might have been swept away by the current. And then, on February 3, 2006, they found the second suitcase. It was buried in a shallow depression beneath a fallen tree, less than a mile from where the first had been discovered. This one was newer, made of black nylon instead of metal, and when investigators opened it, they found something that made everyone in the room go silent. Photographs. Dozens of them. Polaroids, just like the one that had been found in the rental car 15 years earlier. But these were different. They showed the cabin, the surrounding woods, the interior rooms, and in several of the photos, Lauren and Michael were visible, but they were not smiling. They were not posing. They looked terrified. In one image, Lauren stood near the window, her hands pressed against the glass, her face pale. In another, Michael was sitting on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. And in the final photograph, taken from outside the cabin looking in, both of them were visible through the window, standing perfectly still, staring directly at the camera, as if they knew someone was watching. Morelli felt his blood run cold. He turned the photograph over, and on the back, written in the same handwriting as the message on the bathroom mirror, were 3 words. "They are mine." The investigation exploded. News outlets across the country picked up the story, and suddenly, the disappearance of Michael and Lauren Garrett was front-page news again. The theories flooded in from amateur detectives, true crime enthusiasts, and conspiracy theorists. Some believed the couple had been stalked by a serial killer who had never been caught. Others thought they had stumbled onto something illegal, a drug operation or smuggling ring, and had been silenced. But Morelli knew the truth was stranger than any theory, because when the forensic team analyzed the photographs, they discovered something impossible. The timestamps on several of the Polaroids showed dates after December 15, 1991. The last photo, the one showing Lauren and Michael staring out the window, was dated December 20th, the same day their rental car had been found at the rest stop, which meant someone had been with them, or near them, for nearly a week after they were supposed to have checked out. And whoever that person was, they had been documenting everything. The final piece of evidence came in late February. A hiker stumbled across a campsite deep in the woods, roughly 5 miles from where the suitcases had been found. The site was old, abandoned for years, but still intact. There was a tent, collapsed and half buried in snow, a fire pit filled with ash and charred wood, and scattered around the perimeter were more Polaroids, weathered and faded but still recognizable. They were all of Lauren. Morelli stood at the edge of the campsite, staring down at the photographs, and realized with a sickening certainty that this was not a random crime. This had been planned. Someone had chosen the Garretts, had followed them to the cabin, had watched them, had waited. And then, on December 20th, 1991, something terrible had happened. But what? And where were their bodies? The case remains open to this day. Despite the evidence, despite the photographs, despite the suitcases and the campsite and the chilling message on the bathroom mirror, no one has ever been arrested. No one has ever confessed. And Michael and Lauren Garrett have never been found. Their families still wait for answers. Morelli, now fully retired, still keeps a file on his desk at home, still reviews the evidence on sleepless nights, still wonders what really happened in those woods. Because somewhere out there, buried beneath the snow or hidden in the darkness of the forest, the truth is waiting. And it is far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. The discovery of the campsite in February 2006 marked a turning point in the investigation, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of bringing clarity, it opened a door into something far darker, something that would challenge everything Detective Frank Morelli thought he understood about the case. The forensic team spent 3 weeks processing the abandoned campsite. They collected soil samples, analyzed the fire pit residue, catalogued every scrap of debris. The tent was a standard camping model from the late 80s, sold in sporting goods stores across the country. There were no serial numbers, no way to trace its purchase. The sleeping bag inside was rotted through, but tucked into a side pocket of a backpack that had been left behind. Investigators found something that made the entire room go quiet when it was brought back to the lab. A journal. The cover was water-damaged, the pages stuck together in clumps, but the forensic document specialist worked carefully to separate them, photographing each page before attempting preservation. What emerged from those fragile sheets of paper was a narrative so disturbing that Morelli had to step outside twice while reading it, his hands shaking, his mind reeling. The journal belonged to someone who called themselves only by the initial D. No full name, no identifying information. But the entries began in November 1991, just weeks before Michael and Lauren Garrett disappeared. The first entry was dated November 9th, 1991. Found her today. She does not know me yet, but she will. She has the same eyes, the same smile. I followed her from the grocery store to her car. She was humming. I could hear it even from across the parking lot. It reminded me of before, of what I lost. She is perfect. She is exactly what I have been searching for. Morelli read the words 3 times, each time feeling his stomach turn. The date was exactly 1 week after Michael and Lauren had gotten married. The grocery store referenced was later identified as a location in Portland, just blocks from the apartment where the couple had been living. He had been watching Lauren for weeks before the cabin trip, maybe longer. The entries continued, growing more detailed, more obsessive. Dee described following Lauren to work, noting what time she arrived at the elementary school, what she wore, who she spoke to during her lunch break. Dee watched Michael too, studying his routines, his habits, learning when he left for work and when he returned. The journal entries revealed a person who was patient, methodical, someone who understood how to move through the world without being noticed. But the most chilling entries came in early December. December 7th, 1991. They are planning a trip. I heard them talking about it in the coffee shop on Morrison Street. A cabin in the mountains. She looked so happy when he showed her the brochure. She does not realize yet that this is a gift. A gift for me. They are going somewhere quiet, somewhere far from everyone. Somewhere we can finally be alone. Morelli cross-referenced the date and location. There was a coffee shop on Morrison Street in Portland that Michael and Lauren had frequented. Multiple witnesses from the original investigation had confirmed the couple had been regulars there. But no one had reported seeing anyone suspicious, no one watching from the shadows. They had been invisible. The journal entries from mid-December became fragmented, harder to read. Some pages were torn, others stained with something dark that the lab could not definitively identify. But the timeline matched perfectly with the days Michael and Lauren had spent at the cabin. December 14th, 1991. They arrived last night. I watched them carry their bags inside, watch him light the fire. She stood by the window for a long time, looking out at the snow. I was so close I could see her breath on the glass. She is even more beautiful here, away from the noise of the city. I will wait until they are comfortable, until they feel safe. That is when I will introduce myself. The entry ended there, but the next page was covered in frantic handwriting. The letters pressed so hard into the paper that they had torn through in places. December 15th, 1991. He saw me. I was too close to the window and he saw me. He came outside, shouting, asking who I was. I tried to explain, but he would not listen. She came out too, and when she saw me, she screamed. She screamed like I was a monster. I am not a monster. I am the only one who truly sees her, but they do not understand, not yet. I had to make them understand. The journal entries stopped after that date. The remaining pages were blank except for one final entry, written in a calmer hand, dated December 20th, 1991. It is done. They will never be apart now. I made sure of that. The cabin will remember. The woods will keep the secret. And I will carry her with me, always. Morelli sat in his office, staring at the photocopied pages spread across his desk, and felt a rage building inside him that he had not experienced in decades. This person, this D, had stalked a young couple, had terrorized them, had done something unspeakable in those woods. And somewhere, buried or hidden or destroyed beyond recognition, Michael and Lauren Garrett were still out. The investigation shifted focus. Analysts began compiling a profile of the suspect based on the journal entries. The language suggested someone educated, articulate, but deeply disturbed. The level of planning indicated someone with time and resources, someone who could take weeks off to follow the couple without drawing attention. The obsessive focus on Lauren suggested a previous trauma, possibly the loss of someone who resembled her. But who was D? Morelli returned to the original case file, looking for anything he might have missed 15 years earlier. He reviewed every interview, every statement, every scrap of evidence. And then he found it, buried in the supplemental reports from the initial search. On December 18th, 1991, 2 days before the rental car had been found, a gas station attendant in Packwood, Washington, had reported a strange encounter. A man had come in late at night, covered in mud, his clothes torn, acting erratic. He had paid for gas in cash, asked for directions to the nearest highway, and then disappeared into the night. The attendant had noted the interaction in a logbook, but it had never been followed up on because there had been no reason to connect it to the missing couple at the time. But now, with the journal in hand, Morelli wondered if that man had been deep. He tracked down the gas station attendant, a man named Walter Pruitt, who was now in his 70s and living in a retirement community in Tacoma. Walter remembered the encounter clearly, even after all these years. He described the man as being in his 30s, tall, thin, with dark hair and pale skin, but what stood out most was his eyes. They were empty, Walter said, his voice quiet, like he was looking right through me, and his hands were shaking. He kept glancing at the door like someone was going to come in after him. I asked if he was okay and he just smiled. Not a friendly smile, a smile that made my skin crawl. He said he was fine, said he was just passing through. But I watched him drive away and I swear there was someone else in the car with him. I could see a shape in the back seat, like someone was lying down. Morelli felt his pulse quicken. He asked Walter if he remembered anything about the vehicle, and Walter nodded. It was an old truck, Ford, I think. Dark blue or maybe black, hard to tell in the dark. But the license plate was out of state. California, I am pretty sure. Morelli immediately ran a search through the database, cross-referencing vehicles matching that description, with owners who had criminal records or histories of violent behavior. There were hundreds of results, but one name stood out: Douglas Everett Vance. Vance was 32 years old in 1991. a former graduate student who had been expelled from the University of Oregon in 1989 for stalking a female classmate. His academic background was in psychology, specifically the study of attachment and obsession. He had disappeared from public records in late 1990, with no forwarding address, no employment history, no paper trail, and his initials were DEV, close enough to the single initial used in the journal. Morelli pulled Vance's file and felt a chill run down his spine. The photograph on his driver's license matched the description Walter Pruitt had given. Tall, thin, dark hair, pale skin. But it was the address listed on the license that made everything click into place. In 1988, Vance had lived in Portland, Oregon, just 3 miles from where Michael and Lauren Garrett had lived. The investigation exploded once again. A warrant was issued for Douglas Vance, but he had vanished. No credit card activity, no bank withdrawals, no sightings. It was as if he had ceased to exist after December 1991. Investigators searched his last known address, a rundown apartment in Salem, Oregon, but it had been cleared out years earlier. The landlord remembered Vance as quiet, paid his rent on time, kept to himself. But then the landlord mentioned something strange. A few weeks before Vance had moved out, he had asked about soundproofing the walls. He had said he was working on a recording project, something that required absolute silence. The landlord had thought it was odd but had not questioned it. When investigators checked the apartment more thoroughly, using luminol and cadaver dogs, they found traces of blood in the floorboards. Not much, just enough to suggest something violent had happened there. DNA testing confirmed the blood did not belong to Michael or Lauren, but to an unidentified female. The theory began to take shape. Douglas Vance had likely killed before. The woman he had stalked at the university may not have been his first victim. He had perfected his methods, learned how to abduct, how to hide evidence, how to disappear. And when he saw Lauren Garrett, someone who reminded him of a previous victim or a lost love, he had fixated on her. But the question remained, where were the bodies? In April 2006, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A retired forest ranger named Dale Hutchins contacted the sheriff's office with information about a cave system near Mount Rainier. He had been working in the area in the early 90s and had always wondered about a particular cave that had been sealed off due to instability. But he remembered that in late December 1991, he had noticed fresh disturbances near the entrance, signs that someone had been digging. Morelli organized an expedition to the site. It took 2 days to reach the cave, cutting through dense forest and navigating treacherous terrain. When they finally arrived, they found the entrance partially collapsed, blocked by rocks and debris. It took a full day to carefully excavate the opening, and when they finally broke through, the air that rushed out was stale and cold, untouched for years. Inside the cave, the team found a makeshift camp, a lantern long since burned out, a pile of blankets, rotted and filthy, and in the back, behind a natural rock formation, they found what they had been searching for: 2 bodies wrapped in plastic sheeting, lying side by side. The medical examiner confirmed that the remains belonged to Michael and Lauren Garrett. Cause of death for both was asphyxiation. There were no signs of sexual assault, no evidence of prolonged torture, but the positioning of the bodies was deliberate. They had been placed carefully, almost reverently, their hands positioned as if they were holding each other. Douglas Vance had killed them, but in his twisted mind he believed he was preserving something, keeping them together, making them eternal. The discovery brought closure to the families, but it opened new questions. Where was Vance now? Was he still alive? Had he killed again? The FBI launched a nationwide manhunt, and for months there were no leads. But then, in August 2006, a body was found in a motel room in Bend, Oregon. The man had been dead for approximately 2 weeks, death by apparent suicide. There was no identification on the body, but fingerprints confirmed it was Douglas Vance. On the nightstand beside the bed, investigators found one final item, a photograph of Lauren Garrett, the same image that had been found in the rental car 15 years earlier. And on the back, in Vance's handwriting, were the words that would haunt Morelli for the rest of his life: I kept my promise. We are together now. The case was officially closed in September 2006. Michael and Lauren Garrett were laid to rest in a private ceremony attended by their families and a handful of investigators who had bring them home. Morelli attended the funeral, standing at the back, watching as the caskets were lowered into the ground. He thought about the journal entries, about the campsite, about the 15 years that had passed while the truth remained hidden beneath the snow. He thought about Douglas Vance, a man so consumed by obsession that he had destroyed 2 innocent lives and ultimately himself. And he thought about all the other victims, the ones who had never been found, the ones whose names were still unknown, because the blood in Vance's apartment had never been identified, and the journal had referenced someone else, someone who had set Vance on this path. Morelli knew that somewhere out there, buried in the cold earth or hidden in the shadows of the forest, there were more secrets waiting to be uncovered, more families waiting for answers, more ghosts demanding justice. The Garrett case was closed, but the darkness that had consumed Douglas Vance was still out there, lingering in the places where light could not reach. And on cold winter nights, when the snow falls heavy over the forests of Washington, some people still talk about the cabin at Pinecrest Lodge. They talk about the couple who went there to celebrate their marriage and never came home. They talk about the man who watched them, who stole their future, and they wonder if he was truly alone, because in 2007, another couple went missing near Mount Rainier. They had rented a cabin similar to the one the Garretts had stayed in. They had been newlyweds, just like Michael and Lauren, and when investigators searched the property, they found a Polaroid photograph tucked beneath the mattress. It showed the couple standing outside the cabin, smiling, and drawn across the woman's face in red ink was an X. The photograph was dated January 2007, 4 months after Douglas Vance had been found dead. The investigation was reopened immediately, but by then the trail had gone cold once again. The couple, identified as Gregory and Emma Sinclair, were never found. Their rental car was discovered at the same rest stop where the Garrett's vehicle had been located 16 years earlier, and in the trunk, wrapped in plastic, was a metal suitcase containing their belongings. Morelli came out of retirement to consult on the case, but he knew the truth before he even looked at the evidence. This was not a copycat, this was something else. Something that had been lurking in those woods long before Douglas Vance had ever set foot there. The case remains open. The bodies of Gregory and Emma Sinclair have never been recovered, and every year someone else goes missing in the forests surrounding Mount Rainier. Not many, just enough to keep the whispers alive, just enough to remind people that some places hold darkness that cannot be explained, cannot be rationalized, cannot be stopped. Morelli passed away in 2011, taking whatever final theories he had to his grave. But before he died, he gave one last interview to a local journalist, and his final words were these: "I've spent 40 years in law enforcement. I have seen evil in every form it takes. But what happened in those woods was not just evil. It was hunger, a hunger that does not die when one person dies. It just waits, and when the time is right, it finds someone new to feed it."
The journalist asked him what he meant, but Morelli just shook his head and looked out the window at the distant mountains. "Go to that cabin," he said. "Stand there at night and listen. Really listen. You will hear it. The woods remember, and they are still waiting." No one knows what Morelli heard in those final years, what kept him awake at night, what drove him to keep investigating long after the case had been closed. But those who knew him said he changed after the Garrett case. He became quieter, more withdrawn, haunted by something he could never fully articulate. And sometimes, late at night, he would pull out the photographs from the campsite and stare at them for hours, searching for something hidden in the shadows, something he had missed. He never found it, but the forest knows. The snow knows, and somewhere in the darkness, where the trees grow so thick that sunlight never touches the ground, the truth is waiting, has always been waiting, and it will wait forever, patient and silent, until the next couple arrives, smiling and hopeful, ready to start their lives together in a quiet cabin far from the world. As the woods are hungry, and they are never satisfied.